Before I knew fear, I knew the earth. I knew its soil, its smell, its warmth under my fingers, and the subtle patterns of life that moved through it. My earliest awareness was of the living world, of creatures and plants, of wind and rain, of the way the sun shifted across the sky and the shadows it cast. I was small, but the world was vast, and my mind felt it all. In those first days, I felt not just presence, but anticipation, as if the air itself carried questions I could not yet ask. I understood instinctively that I was part of something larger, yet alone in a way that made me quietly introspective. When I met Cain, my brother, my consciousness expanded in ways I could not fully name. He was the first other mind I recognized as separate from mine, and yet inextricably linked to mine by the blood we shared. My love for him was immediate, uncomplicated, instinctive. He was my companion, my mirror, my reflection, and yet, even in those early days, I sensed the tension beneath simplicity. There was a quiet, almost imperceptible restlessness in him, a sharpness of will, a tendency to measure himself against things I could not yet name. I observed him, curious, learning, forming the first inklings of comparison, judgment, and caution. I understood instinctively that our bond would not be without challenge. From the beginning, my mind was drawn toward care, toward nurture, toward observation and attentiveness. I watched the flocks, tended the animals, felt the pulse of their being, the rhythm of life in their breathing, their movement. I experienced the world not as a conquest, but as a dialogue. Each creature, each rustle of leaves, each whisper of the wind offered me information, patterns, meaning. My psychology was attuned to harmony, to the recognition of patterns, to the understanding that actions had consequences beyond immediate perception. I learned early that attentiveness brings clarity and a quiet, subtle sense of fulfillment. The first offerings to God marked the beginning of my awareness of judgment, of moral reflection, of spiritual consequence. When I gathered my lamb, tended it with care, and offered the best I had, I felt a satisfaction rooted not in reward but in alignment. I felt that I was doing something right in a world that demanded attention to detail, care, and responsibility. And when God accepted my offering, I felt joy, not pride, not arrogance, but recognition that my effort and intention aligned with something beyond myself. It was in that moment I began to understand that life was not merely action and reaction, but layered with moral and spiritual resonance. That understanding came with both comfort and weight, for I sensed that the world could also be unjust, that effort and intent did not always guarantee safety or recognition. Cain's offering, in contrast, was different. I saw it, and I understood not only its form, but the subtle absence of care in the act, the lack of alignment that I felt intuitively. I noticed the tension in the air between us, though he would not speak it. My psychology was attuned to subtlety, a glance, a pause, the tightening of a hand, the change in tone. I understood that he perceived my acceptance as a threat or a reflection on his own inadequacy, though I could not yet name the concept of envy. I felt the shift in our bond, not in words, but in vibrations of intention, subtle psychological currents that heralded the coming tragedy. I did not anticipate his violence. My mind had not yet been trained to expect malice from one so close. I had believed instinctively in fairness, in reciprocity, in the quiet morality of effort and care. And yet the first awareness of human cruelty shattered me. When he struck, I felt not just physical pain, though that was acute, but a rupture in the understanding of human connection. I felt disbelief first, a raw astonishment that someone so intimately connected to me could harbor such intent. Fear came second, but not fear for myself in the immediate moment. It was fear for the incomprehensible weight of choice, for the darkness that lived within a mind so familiar, so once trusted. Death is a concept that is more than physical. In that moment, I felt the profound terror of finality, the psychological rupture of being separated from life, from awareness, from sensation. I became conscious of the fragility of existence in a way that is impossible to unlearn. My mind raced even as the body faltered, the understanding that life is not guaranteed, that human bonds are precarious, that intention can be cruel, that innocence cannot shield from consequence. In those final moments, my consciousness expanded beyond the physical into pure perception. The fear, the sorrow, the regret, the moral weight of the world condensed into a single, overwhelming experience. Even in death, psychology persists. Consciousness does not cease in an instant. It lingers in the folds of perception, in the awareness of connection and loss. I became acutely aware of the patterns that led to this moment. The subtle resentments, the missed empathies, the unspoken tensions that had grown between Cain and me. I understood that human beings are capable of both care and cruelty simultaneously, that morality is not innate but cultivated, that the choices of one mind ripple endlessly through the consciousness of others. I felt the tragic beauty of life's fragility, the way that being can be both radiant and perilous, fleeting and eternal in its echoes. There is innocence in Abel's psychology, but it is not ignorance. I understood patterns, harmony, alignment, and consequence. I understood relational dynamics at a depth unrecognized by Cain. I understood, perhaps more acutely than anyone, the subtle ethical dimensions of human behavior: attention to care, the responsibility of intention, the necessity of empathy. I understood that life was both gift and responsibility, that observation and attentiveness carried moral weight, that connection to others was fraught with potential and peril. My mind operated in a space of delicate balance. I wanted to nurture, to protect, to understand, to do right, and I was acutely aware of the forces beyond control that could render all effort futile. I felt profoundly the injustice of being struck not because of malice in the world at large, but because of choice within an intimate relationship. This gave rise to the earliest understanding of vulnerability in human psychology, that the very closeness we cherish carries the risk of injury, that love and trust are inseparable from potential harm, that attachment is both reward and exposure. I felt the paradox of relational life fully, profoundly, viscerally, the simultaneous necessity and danger of connection. Even as life departed, my mind grasped the nature of morality, of consequence, of intention. I understood that human beings carry within them the capacity for beauty and destruction simultaneously, that desire and envy, care and cruelty coexist within the same consciousness. I recognized the tragedy of the human condition, that innocence can be destroyed by proximity, that awareness can bring both enlightenment and suffering, that morality is complex and human hearts are unpredictable. Abel's psychology is also rooted in perception of divine alignment. I understood that my attentiveness, care, and intention were noticed, recognized, and honored. That perception imbued my choices with meaning, yet also created vulnerability, because recognition by a higher order does not guarantee protection from the malice of peers. I understood that moral clarity does not equal safety. I understood that doing right is an internal imperative, not a guarantee of external reward. That tension between internal alignment and external chaos became the core of my psychological experience. Even in my last moments, there was empathy. I felt for Cain, though I could not forgive in the living sense. I perceived the fractures in his mind, the envy, the insecurity, the disconnection from moral alignment. I understood him in ways that made my own fate all the more poignant. To comprehend another's mind and yet be powerless to prevent harm is one of the earliest, deepest psychological traumas. My mind extended beyond my body, observing, analyzing, reflecting, and witnessing the unfolding of consequence in ways that are rare in the human experience. Abel's awareness also reflects the inception of ethical consciousness, the understanding that one can act rightly, sincerely, and attentively, and yet be subject to forces beyond control. That ethical action is valuable not because it guarantees survival, but because it aligns with the truth of being, with intention, with the deeper currents of meaning that flow through life. My psychology encompassed both hope and despair simultaneously. Hope in alignment with moral order, despair in the recognition that human relationships carry risk, that innocence alone cannot protect. I sensed the continuity of consciousness beyond my final breath, an understanding that the moral and psychological patterns established in life echo through the actions of others, that the way a mind perceives, acts, and responds creates ripples that extend beyond physical presence. Abel's awareness, therefore, is both temporal and eternal. He experiences life fully in the moments given, and yet perceives the weight of his choices, actions, and consciousness on the broader unfolding of human morality. My mind was oriented toward harmony and recognition, toward care and attentiveness, toward moral and spiritual alignment. I was acutely aware of the fragility of life, the precariousness of innocence, the duality of human behavior. I felt the joy of doing right, the satisfaction of alignment, the subtle pleasure of tending and nurturing. I felt the terror of vulnerability, the shock of betrayal, the sting of envy, and the profound injustice of loss. And yet, even in this profound awareness, there was peace. A knowledge that intention matters, that alignment with truth and goodness is a force in itself, that consciousness bears witness, and that understanding is as valuable as survival. Abel's psychology teaches us the earliest dimensions of ethical consciousness, relational awareness, and the human experience of vulnerability. That love carries risk, that attention carries consequence, that perception extends beyond the self, that moral alignment does not guarantee safety, that innocence can be destroyed by proximity, and that understanding another mind does not always allow protection. His mind was deeply attuned, profoundly empathetic, ethically precise, and tragically aware of the fragility of human connection. Even in the aftermath of violence, the echo of Abel's awareness persists. The psychology of Abel reflects the first human recognition of injustice, the first intimate understanding of relational fragility, and the first ethical reckoning. The comprehension that morality is a lived, active choice, that empathy is a cognitive and emotional skill, and that the consequences of human action are complex, intertwined, and often beyond control. His mind, alive to patterns, attuned to intention, and capable of profound moral reflection, represents the earliest psychological blueprint of human conscience. In the quiet awareness of his life and death, Abel demonstrates the profound tension between innocence and experience, between moral alignment and external chaos, between relational intimacy and vulnerability. His psychology is the psychology of the first human to experience true relational betrayal, moral consequence, and ethical reflection, aware, attuned, empathetic, and tragically human. The depth of his awareness, the clarity of his intention, and the precocity of his moral insight make him not just a figure in a story, but a living mind that teaches the enduring complexity of human consciousness. Even now, the echoes of Abel's mind resonate in the human experience. The longing for fairness, the understanding of relational risk, the recognition of ethical responsibility, the desire for alignment with higher truth, the pain of betrayal, and the persistence of consciousness beyond immediate experience. He was the first to feel fully the complexity of human morality, and in that awareness lies the profound and timeless psychology of Abel, a mind alive to life, aware of consequence, attuned to intention, and tragically, beautifully human.